And so you're wondering, why am I concerned with longevity? I became interested in longevity a number of years ago when my pal Mark Liponis invited me to Canyon Ranch, where he was the chief medical officer, and put me through every known test to man. He had me do one of everything, the complete work over. And when it came time to report my findings, the only thing I can remember from that experience is he said, and by the way, you carry the immortality gene. It's not a guarantee, but apparently it's a gene that appears in less than 1% of the population and is, generally speaking, a marker for long life. So I've always thought highly of Mark Liponis ever since. And whether or not he was telling me the truth has always continued as a little item in my mind, because even if it's a placebo, it has worked perfectly, Mark.
120 will be a drop kick, slam dunk for you. No problem, Moses.
Dr. Mark Liponis.
Hi, everybody. Today I'll be talking about, can money buy health? And guessing that most of you in the audience are hoping the answer is yes. And I'll cut to the chase. The answer is yes, but the real question is, well, how much health can money really buy? And just to recap a little bit, this is a return visit to me. I love being back at IdeaCity and back in Canada. We love Canada and Canadians. And my first trip to IdeaCity, '05, where we chronicled the return to health of a man named John Perry Barlow, who some of you may know or may have heard of. Really an American icon, and I think a national treasure, who was a Wyoming cattle rancher, and he was a lyricist for the Grateful Dead. He had founded the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a very eclectic and wonderful man who had not treated his body particularly well. And back in those times, thanks to the genius of Alexander Ciaris and his ability to transform images from CT scans and MRI scans into full color, high resolution fly-throughs where you can fly through the heart and the body of John Perry Barlow, he became the most complete digital data set of a human being ever at that time. And we chronicled the rehabilitation of John Perry, who had not taken good care of his body. And sadly, John passed away last year at the age of 70. And, you know, I have to really thank him for what he taught me. And one of the things he taught me was what's possible in terms of reversing and improving human health. What's possible in terms of recovering from some of the damage. And I was amazed how much improvement there can be when somebody starts to adopt healthier lifestyle practices and behaviors. So I also learned what might not be reversible, some of the things that we can't, address as easily, like exploded discs and mechanical problems with the body that really require some mechanical solutions. I was back in 2012 to speak again about personalized medicine, how people can do better with their own health, because we're all individuals, we're all unique. And so I talked about my mom, who has, had 3 simple rules of, eat right, exercise, and don't smoke. And, at the time she was younger. Now I'm happy to say we just celebrated her 86th birthday, and, she's doing great. So can money really buy health? And to explain that, I'll take you on a journey and compare my patients in 2 different parts of the world. And the first being at the Spa Canyon Ranch, where America's wealthy people come to get healthy, and the second being in the country of Laos in Southeast Asia. And if money can buy health, this is where you probably would see it, here at Canyon Ranch, where I worked for about 25 years until just the beginning of this year. And yes, people would come and learn how to eat better, learn how to exercise better, learn how to reduce stress, learn how to sleep. And we saw quite a few health turnarounds. And this is the place where, if you wanted to buy health, you would go here to try to access it. In fact, John Barlow called it the gold-plated boot camp where the wealthy get healthy. And he's not too far off. But thanks to my amazing and wonderful wife, Siobhan, who's right here. She's exposed me to a little bit more of the rest of the world, and that is not where people can afford all these luxuries, but they have a barely subsistence level of survival in the country of Laos. And we were in northern Laos, and my wife moved there for 6 months in 2015 to build a hospital for kids that's still providing free care for all the children in northern Laos. It's the Lao Friends Hospital. It's wonderful. So if you don't know, Laos is a small landlocked country in Southeast Asia. It's one of the 47 landlocked countries in the world, and they have a communist government and a very impoverished population. We started going there in 2002 and made several trips, and it's an amazing place. There are 49 different ethnic groups. They all have their own customs. They all have their own language. They have their own dress. They generally don't intermarry. And so when we went to provide care, we would sometimes have 3 interpreters to get the language down to English where we could understand it. And it's really fascinating to see these different cultures and different people. Of course, the standard of living is quite depressed in Laos. It's 113th on the list of 195 nations, where Canada is actually number 8 and the US at 17 in terms of the standard of living for across 8 or 10 parameters. Now, my patients in America, in North America, of course, they're quite well off. They have their own, personal trainers. They go to spinning classes. They take Pilates lessons. They shop at Whole Foods. They get their fish shipped in from the Faroe Islands. They eat only free-range chicken. They have all of the health things that money could buy. They have, extravagant homes. They have their own personal chefs sometimes. They have opulent bathrooms. And that's quite in contrast to the quarters in Laos, where this would be your typical room that you'd stay in as you're trying to take care of a village in a town in northern Laos. And the bathrooms were certainly nothing to be very happy about, but you learn to adapt. And so the question is, can money buy health? And I'd say it can certainly buy good teeth. These are the smiles of my patients, and as you can see, there's not a cavity there. There's not a yellow spot to be seen. I mean, if you've got money, you can have some good teeth. And in Laos, these poor kids start destroying their teeth before they're even out of primary school. We found that these kids had horrible dental caries and cavities, and it was really an important public health problem that caused problems over these people's lives. These 2 women walked for 2 days to get to our clinic just so they could get their teeth pulled. And that's what happened. So we started to go with varnishes to help kids protect their teeth, and toothbrushes to teach them just general dental hygiene. And so, money can certainly buy good teeth, and that's something to keep in mind. Now, my patients, they were all on special diets. They were on, they had the gluten-free, the dairy-free, the lactose-free, the allergy elimination, the lectin-free, all these fad diets. And, in Laos, here's the Whole Foods. All the whole food was out on the street where they sold it every morning, and you would go and pick it up. And this was the hospital food. These are family members cooking for their hospitals, their families members that are in the hospital. So the hospital doesn't supply any food. They're responsible for, feeding themselves. Of course, there's not a lot of protein, especially in a landlocked country. You don't have access to the ocean and to good protein sources with fish. And so they would find any protein source they could. For example, any bird that they could catch, or the rats that they would catch. And then this was a very common way to get protein in Laos, because it was hard to get the amount of protein that you needed to support a family. And every village, of course, had a hog, and that would be part of the human food chain in Laos. Of course, I didn't see any gyms in Laos. There's no, Gold's Gym. I don't see any fitness places. The lifestyle is very active. They work hard just to survive. I never saw anybody that was like going jogging in northern Laos. This is what they would do, is they would bring them a water home to their families. And so it was very different. The lifestyle, of course, was very active and required a lot of exercise and work. And as a result, one thing that we did not see in Laos was obesity. They really didn't have it. At least it hasn't gotten there yet. I'm sure someday it will, but for the time being, there's just no obese people in Laos. They're all very trim. And here's the line that stands outside the clinic that these people line up to be seen in the morning. And as you could see, nobody's overweight. Everyone is trim there. Obesity does not exist. But despite that, we were shocked to find double the rates of type 2 diabetes in Laos than exist in the US. Currently in the US, only 9.8% of the population has type 2 diabetes. In Laos, we found 19% of the adults over 40 were diabetic. Now, that's a surprise. This woman's blood sugar shocked me. I had to test it 3 times because it was over 500. She's thin. And of course, there's no type 1 diabetes in Laos because they don't have insulin therapy. Those children, unfortunately, perish. But this is a gentleman, his blood sugar was over 350. Another woman, his blood sugar was over 400. This is the face of diabetes in Laos. And I used to think that diabetes in my patients was from them overeating and becoming overweight. It turns out, no. Diabetes, the source of it is actually from starvation, from malnutrition. And these are epigenetic changes that are passed on for generations, where if your grandmother went through a famine, she likely passed on the trait for diabetes to you. And we know now, and this has been replicated in studies, that being exposed to famine increases the risk of diabetes. Being a low birth weight infant increases the risk of type 2 diabetes. In fact, if you go through a severe famine, that increases your chance of diabetes by 64%. And this has really changed my thinking about diabetes, because I used to think of it as a disease of overconsumption. Now I know it's an adaptive trait that Mother Nature gives to people who are living in poor food supply. So when the food supply is poor, you see high rates of diabetes. It's not a disease of overeating. It's actually a survival trait that Mother Nature gives us to help us survive the next famine. Now, when you're in Laos, it's a very interesting place to be, and I hope you get a chance to go visit. When I'm in Laos, I feel like an NBA player. I mean, I'm not that tall. I'm about 5'10", but in Laos, man, I am tall. I'm huge, because the people are so small. And you get used to these people being just tiny little humans. And, of course, we always thought that that was because that they're genetically small. And it turns out not to be that at all. But instead, the people in Laos are nutritionally small. They don't have the food supply to support the growth that we see in the US. So this is a stunting issue that comes from the lack of good nutrition. Now, in Laos, it's very different what people die from. My patients in North America die from cardiovascular disease. They die from cancer. They die from neurologic conditions. These are the diseases that affect us later in life, in older age. When we get into our 70s and 80s and 90s, these are the conditions that we're going to be dealing with most likely. But in Laos, they're dying from malnutrition. They're dying from infectious diseases, from things like pneumonia, tuberculosis, insect-borne diseases, and accidents, a very different structure and cause of death. Now, in terms of longevity, in my 25 years of experience of taking care of the most wealthy patients, my average patient's life expectancy became 80.5. And for those patients of mine who did not have cancer, it was 82.5 years, whereas the US average is 78.7. So my patients were doing about 5 years better than most Americans on average because of their affluence. Now, the problem is for my patients that developed cancer, the average life expectancy was only 58.5 in the US. And so cancer is the big bad condition that will shorten our lifespan regardless of wealth. Now, the life expectancy in Laos is about 65, so sure, money can buy health to a degree, but the amount that it can protect us against cancer, unfortunately, is still limited. In the US, of course, people are taking vitamins, too many vitamins, in fact. Not only are they getting vitamin-fortified food, their cereals have extra vitamins, their milk is fortified with vitamin D, extra calcium in their orange juice, all of these fortification of foods, and they're taking vitamins on top of that. And, it's hard to know if they're really working, and in fact, they've shown that in the US, vitamins may actually increase mortality, but in Laos, they save lives in front of your eyes. This was a baby that we learned was dying from a condition called beriberi, something that I had read about in medical school and learned, had never seen a case until going to Laos. And beriberi is a simple vitamin deficiency of vitamin B1. And when we learned that babies in Laos were dying from vitamin B1 deficiency, we got some vitamins. Thanks to the NGOs that are providing vitamins to these remote areas at no cost, we went back to Laos and made sure that every pregnant mother and nursing mother had vitamins to protect their infants against beriberi. The challenge here, surprisingly, teaching them how to open the childproof cap. That was really hard, especially when you don't speak the language. It's very tricky. Now, also in the US, we've got this outbreak of measles and other diseases that should be preventable through vaccines. And if you can look now, you see all the dark blue states where measles has been diagnosed, a disease that was supposed to have been eradicated. And that's because of people that now are, railing against vaccines for their own beliefs. In Laos, the people queue up to get vaccines. They line up and wait for them. They're dying from vaccine-preventable diseases like pneumococcal pneumonia and meningitis and Japanese encephalitis, these horrible diseases. And you heard earlier about the HPV that can cause cancer. So in Laos, they're hoping for vitamins, for vaccines. They're praying for them. And yet in the US, people are shunning them. And it's really such a contrast. And there are so many diseases related to hygiene. This was a woman that had been fine the day before and came in with some paralysis of her face, and it was due to something called cysticercosis, which are tapeworm eggs in the brain. And that's because they drink the water without purifying it, and then they get the tapeworms in their system and they go to the brain and cause problems. This poor child that had an infection affecting his entire leg on the left side had not even been up on his feet for many months, and due to, again, the lack of good nutrition and good medical care. We see this commonly. In the US, many of my patients wish they could be diagnosed with a thyroid disease so they could take thyroid medicine and improve their metabolism and lose the 20 pounds they want to lose, but no. In Laos, they're dying with thyroid conditions. It's so common to see these goiters because of the lack of iodine, because of the lack of a coast. Most of the women that we saw had this. And, it was so great seeing the kids and how adorable they are, and to see them healthier and be able to grow up. And one of the things that we utilized in Laos was ultrasound. They don't have x-rays, they don't have MRI scanners, they don't have CT scanners, so we brought ultrasound. And with that, we were able to really find out what was going on with people. And, they've leapfrogged across some of the technology in Laos. And, it's not just a one-way street. I've actually been so excited about this because there's now a game-changing technology that you may have seen earlier, but this is now in my pocket, a full, complete ultrasound machine that plugs into my phone. Yeah. This has the capability of doing everything that my in-office ultrasound machine here can do, and I now employ ultrasound on every patient. Myself, I had cancer myself many years ago and had to remove a kidney. And if someone had been able to find it sooner by using ultrasound, I might have been able to prevent some of the problems that occurred. So this is something that's coming back from Laos, and now it's being used in my office every day. There's not a patient that leaves my office without getting a full ultrasound scan. It's a requirement, and I really feel that if we're going to make progress with cancer, we have to do that. We have to do screening. We need early detection. Cancer is not the result of something we did, something we got around, something we ate. It's a random event. And the same process that is responsible for evolution of our species is what causes cancer. It's a random mutation that causes a difference in a trait. And because we're all different humans, we have different mutations. But cancer is the same process, meaning we can never get rid of cancer. We'll get rid of humans. We'll stop evolution. We can treat cancer, and we'll find better ways to do that. But we can never stop that process because it's what's responsible for human evolution. So in Laos, the kids don't have iPads, they don't have iPhones, they have iTires, and they have, iBilliards. And they have, iSwings, but, they're still pretty happy. These kids don't need all these electronic gadgets to really live a happy life. And in Laos, I found despite the lack of money, you've got some very happy people. And I learned that, money is not a requirement to be happy. So the lessons learned: money can buy some health, but only to a point. Cancer cuts across economic lines. Where you live is more important than your genetics. Diabetes is not a disease, it's an adaptation to starvation. Vitamins and vaccines do work, and hygiene helps, but dirt isn't all bad. And nutrients are geographic, and these fad diets are really a luxury. Exercise is important, but it's not going to save us in the end. Wealth can lead to longer lives, fewer kids, fewer infections, but more cancer and cardiovascular deaths. And wealth is not a requirement for happiness. Thank you very much.
I'm carrying 2 of Dr. Liponis's books. You can get them upstairs. They will save your life. And I just can't resist reading from the letter that the Canyon Ranch sent me with regard to those tests that were taken way back when. If you would just indulge me for a second. This is a letter from Mark Liponis. I'm writing to provide you with some additional information about the genetic testing you underwent at Canyon Ranch in 2004. Of particular interest was your APOE pattern. The APOE gene is located on the 19th chromosome, and there are at least 3 known variants of the APOE gene, known as APOE2, E3, and E4. They all have 2 19 chromosomes because we get 1 from each parent. That means we all have 2 of the APOE genes, and those 2 genes can be any combination of E2, E3, or E4. Your pattern was APOE 2/2. Yes, 2 2s. Turns out yours is the most rare of all patterns. It's known that centenarians also are more likely to have your gene pattern, so you're in good company. Part of the reason may be that the 2/2 pattern carries a lower risk for Alzheimer's. That pattern's also linked with the lowest risk for cardiovascular disease. Of all the genes, the APOE gene seems to have one of the most powerful effects on longevity and the diseases of aging. Here's the punchline. So far, we know that your genetic pattern is linked with a higher likelihood of living to be 100, a lower risk of developing Alzheimer's disease, and a lower risk of cardiovascular disease. If all that's true, then good advice would be to wear your seatbelt, look both ways when you cross the street, and keep that DeLorean under the speed limit, because a truck is probably going to have to get you at the very end. You lucky dog.
Long live Moses!
I love that.